My entitled brother and his pregnant wife took over my home, trashed my things, and Mom sided with them. Now I'm the villain for kicking them out. My mother sided with them. Now I am the antagonist for asking them to leave. I'm a 26-year-old man who has resided in the city with my parents for the past year. Seems straightforward, doesn't it? It's not what you'd expect. This wasn't a return home because I couldn't manage the rent. I genuinely purchased the dwelling, covering the full mortgage, all groceries, utilities, and costs. My parents contribute nothing financially. To provide some background, my parents, Karenza, 52, and Elliot, 55, are retired educators. They had lived in the countryside for many years, but after ceasing work, they decided they desired city life. They grew weary of the quiet existence and wished to be nearer to more engaging experiences. At least, that's what they conveyed. I considered why not. I earn a good income as a software engineer, and the city offers superior professional opportunities. Additionally, I thought I'd assist them, given all they had done for me during my upbringing. Just typical family dynamics. So, we relocated to this charming 3-bedroom house in the city. I'm not describing a grand estate, but it's a pleasant property with 3 bedrooms, a modest backyard, and a spacious living area for everyone to gather. Since I handle the mortgage, I made sure to claim the primary bedroom. It features a walk-in closet and its own attached bathroom, which is perfect because who truly wants to share a bathroom? No, thank you. As for the 2nd bedroom, that serves as my home office. Given that I work remotely around 80% of the time, I arranged everything precisely as I desired. Dual monitors, a comfortable chair, the complete setup. I envisioned the 3rd bedroom functioning as a guest room for visiting relatives or similar purposes. Simple enough, right? Initially, everything appeared fine. My parents were simply delighted to be in the city, and we settled into a rather comfortable routine. They pursued their interests, gardening, watching television, whatever retired individuals do. While I performed my job, managed the bills, and cleaned the house. I didn't object to covering all expenses. I earn a 6-figure salary, and they have no income beyond their pensions. Besides, it's family. You don't charge family rent, do you? The breaking point. Then came the turning point, and I must tell you, it arrived more swiftly than I could have anticipated. My mother casually mentioned something at breakfast one morning, as if it were a minor detail. She approached, saying, "You know, your brother Eric and Lucy are thinking about moving to the city. They aren't doing very well back in the old town, and Lucy's expecting, so they could really use some assistance." At first, I didn't dwell on it. Eric, 28, and Lucy, 26, have always been the type of couple who transitioned from one difficult situation to another. They weren't exactly failing, but they certainly weren't flourishing either. Lucy's pregnancy introduced another layer of complexity. I thought, okay, perhaps they'll move to the city and secure a small apartment or something. But my mother had different intentions. A few days later, she sat me down and said, in a very innocent tone, "We've invited Eric and Lucy to stay with us. It will just be for a short while until they get back on their feet." Now, this was the moment I should have seen it coming, but I did not. I simply nodded along, thinking, okay, whatever. They'll stay for a bit and then find their own dwelling. What I didn't grasp was that this was merely the onset of chaos. My parents didn't explicitly inquire if I was agreeable to their moving in. They simply informed me after having already extended the invitation. I was still processing everything. When Eric and Lucy appeared at our door a week later, luggage in hand, appearing as though they were settling in for the long haul. So here's the situation. They move in, and it's immediately apparent they intend to remain indefinitely. I could already feel the pressure mounting because I am responsible for everything. Groceries, utilities, mortgage, you name it. And now I have 2 additional people to feed and support. No one even bothered to ask if I was okay with it. They just relocated as if it were the most natural occurrence. Don't misunderstand, I love my brother. He's family after all. But Eric isn't precisely the most accountable individual. He's the sort of person who always finds himself in predicaments and then relies on others for assistance. And Lucy, she's polite enough, but she possesses an entitled attitude that irritates me, as if her pregnancy automatically warrants special consideration from everyone around her. But this is when things became truly complicated. Lucy started making these subtle remarks a few days after they moved in. You know the kind? They seem harmless but are actually quite bothersome. She'd say things like, "This place is so spacious. It must be difficult for you to clean it all by yourself. And, I can't wait until the baby is here. We're going to require a lot of room for all the baby items." I didn't think much of it at first, but then came the astonishing development. Eric and Lucy approached me one evening after I had completed a lengthy workday and asked if we could converse. I was thinking, all right, perhaps they're going to apologize for occupying space and consuming all the food without offering to help. But no. Instead, Lucy calmly stated, "So, we've been considering it would make more sense for us to take the master bedroom." I simply stared at her. I couldn't believe what I heard. "We need more space," Eric asserted, as if it were obvious. "The baby is going to require a lot of things, and your room has a walk-in closet and a private bathroom. Now bear in mind that I pay the entire mortgage. The house is registered in my name. I also cover all food costs, and I've been supporting the entire household without expecting anything in return. And now they were requesting I surrender my own bedroom." I was stunned. I couldn't even respond immediately. It felt as though the audacity had struck me all at once. Eventually I replied, "Why don't you just use the spare room? It's ample in size and already prepared for guests." Lucy was not receptive. "But that room doesn't have a walk-in closet, and the baby's going to need space." I looked at them for a few seconds, attempting to remain composed. "I'm not relinquishing my room," I stated, as calmly as possible. "You can have the spare room, or you can find another place to reside." Eric appeared surprised that I wasn't just acquiescing, but Lucy was visibly offended. And that's when I realized things were not going to proceed smoothly. Escalation. Okay, so after that dreadful conversation where Eric and Lucy directly asked me to give up my room, I hoped they'd realize how absurd they sounded and retreat. Who in their right mind would ask the person who pays the mortgage, buys groceries, and keeps the lights on to simply surrender their space? But of course, this is not what occurred. Over the next few days, I began to notice these minor details. For starters, Eric and Lucy were immediately quite at ease, almost excessively so. They'd scatter their belongings around the living room, kick off their shoes near the sofa, and Lucy was already discussing where she intended to place all the baby supplies, as if the house were theirs. I wasn't speaking up yet, but I had a feeling something was about to transpire. So one day I had to spend a few hours at my workplace. Usually I work from home, but there are occasions when I must attend meetings. Anyway, I returned home around lunchtime to grab something to eat, and the moment I walked in, I observed something peculiar. My belongings, my personal items, were in the hallway. My clothing was piled on the floor. My computer monitor was simply sitting there, unplugged, as if someone was in the process of relocating it. My heart was already pounding because I understood what this implied, but I needed to witness it for myself. I entered my room, and there Lucy was, standing in the center of it, packing the last of my possessions. She didn't even appear surprised when I entered. She just glanced at me as if saying, "Oh hey, I was just finishing up." I couldn't believe it. "What in the world are you doing?" I exclaimed, considerably louder than I intended. She had the nerve to appear calm and collected, as if this were no significant matter. "Your mom said we could start moving our stuff in here. The baby's coming soon, and we need the space," she stated, as if it were the most natural thing imaginable. I could feel my blood boiling. My mother said what? My mother, who contributes nothing to the mortgage, thought it was acceptable to simply surrender my room to Eric and Lucy without first consulting me. I wasn't going to let this slide. "No," I responded, entering the room. "You're not moving into my room. I already instructed you both to take the guest room." Lucy did not appreciate that. She folded her arms and gave me a look as if I were the one acting ridiculously. "The guest room is too small for the baby, and there's no closet. We need more space." I was not having it. "I don't care. You're not taking my room. I'm the one paying the mortgage. I'm the one who's been paying for everything in this house. And you and Eric aren't even contributing anything. If you need more space, you're welcome to find your own place." At this point I was furious, and I could tell Lucy was also upset, but I didn't care. She did not back down, however. "Your mom said it was fine," she declared, as if it were the final word. This is where I lost it. I marched back out of the room, grabbed my phone, and called my mother, who wasn't even home at the moment. I didn't even wait for her to say hello after she answered. "Mom, did you tell Eric and Lucy they could move into my room?" There was a lengthy pause on the other end, as if she wasn't sure what to say. She finally said, "Well, I thought it would be the best solution. They need the space, and you already have the office. It's not like you're using the room for much." I couldn't believe what I heard. "Are you serious right now?" I demanded. "I pay the mortgage. I pay for all the groceries. I pay the bills. And you think it's okay if Eric and Lucy just take over my room?" My mother tried to calm me down, saying it wasn't a big issue, and that we were all family, but I was done listening. "I'm not giving them my room," and if they don't move their stuff out, they're going to need to find another place to stay. Lucy must have heard me since she stormed out of the room enraged. You're seriously going to throw us out with a baby on the way? That's when Eric entered. He must have heard the disturbance from outside since he came in looking very angry. What's going on? He demanded, so I explained it for him. What's going on is your wife thinks she can just take over my room without even asking, and I'm telling you both right now, it's not happening. You can either stay in the guest room, or you can leave. Eric was not pleased about this. He became defensive, stating they were family, and I should be willing to make sacrifices for them. But at this time, I was beyond reasoning. Sacrifices? I'm already paying for this entire house. What are you guys contributing, huh? Nothing. And now you think you can just walk in and take over? The shouting grew quite loud at that point, and I believe it was evident that neither side was yielding. My mother tried to call me back, but I ignored her. I was too upset to deal with her justifications. Eric kept going on about how I wasn't being fair, how they had a baby on the way, and how families should stick together during difficult times. But I had endured enough. I turned to both of them and said, "You have until the end of the day to move your belongings out of my room. If you don't, I'll do it for you." Lucy went out, slamming the door behind her, and Eric stood there, gazing at me as if I were the villain. But I didn't care. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me in my own home, especially when I was the one paying for everything. I spent the remainder of the day in my office attempting to cool down. I didn't want to deal with either of them, and I knew going back out there would only lead to another argument. But deep down, I knew it was only the beginning. They weren't going to accept this passively, and I suspected my mother would get involved again. But I was not going to back down either. Not this time. The ultimate stand. After Eric and Lucy's confrontation, I hoped they'd finally relent. I made it clear my room was unavailable, and they could either stay in the guest room or find another place to reside. It seemed quite straightforward to me. However, not everything went as planned. The following day, I kept mostly to myself. I wasn't seeking further drama, and I was still seething about how things had unfolded. I spent most of my time working, in the office, pretending everything was normal. But by the time dinner arrived, I could sense the tension in the air. Everyone seemed to be avoiding each other, tiptoeing around the obvious problem. I didn't mind the silence. If Eric and Lucy could finally remain in the guest room without causing any more issues, I believed I could tolerate it. But then something occurred that pushed me to the brink. That evening, I entered the kitchen to get some supper. I had purchased all the groceries, as I always do. But when I opened the fridge, it was nearly empty. I'm talking about food I bought just 2 days ago. It was gone. I checked the freezer. Same outcome. I knew my parents didn't eat that way, and it certainly wasn't me. So, who else could it be? Eric and Lucy. They'd probably taken everything without asking. I was already upset, but I tried to dismiss it, thinking, whatever, I'll just pick up more tomorrow. However, it wasn't only the food. When I went to sit at the table to eat, my mother entered the kitchen without looking me in the eye. She quietly prepared plates for herself, my father, Eric, and Lucy. And then she did not prepare one for me. At first, I assumed she had forgotten, so I just waited. But after serving everyone, she sat down. I was left standing there like an idiot, watching as everyone began eating. I'm not going to lie, I felt the fury rising again. It felt like they were all punishing me for asserting myself. I stared at my mother, attempting to maintain my composure. You didn't make me a plate. She scarcely glanced up. You don't want to help the family, and you don't eat with the family, she added casually, as if she were discussing the weather. I couldn't believe what I heard. Excuse me? I pay for everything here, the groceries, the mortgage, and now I'm being excluded? She didn't even respond. My dad just sighed and continued eating as if nothing had happened, which irritated me even more. Eric and Lucy sat there with smug expressions on their faces, as if they had won some sort of power struggle. Lucy even had the audacity to smile at me as I walked past. I could not tolerate it anymore. I was not about to be treated as an outsider in the house I had paid for. I slammed the fridge door shut and rushed out of the kitchen, my thoughts racing. I knew what I needed to do next. I rushed straight to my room, got my laptop, and began searching for eviction notices. I reasoned that if they didn't want to respect me, they could find another place to live. I mean, enough is enough, right? I am not a free hotel service. Within an hour, I had the documentation ready. I printed 2 sets, one for Eric and Lucy and one for my parents. It felt strange to remove my own family. But they had crossed the line. They had been disrespecting me for weeks, acting as if the house was theirs, and then freezing me out when I refused to yield to their ridiculous demands. I was not going to tolerate it anymore. After the notices were printed, I stepped out to the living room where everyone was sitting and pretended nothing was amiss. I didn't say anything. I just placed the papers down in front of my parents before handing another set to Eric and Lucy. "What's this?" Eric inquired, picking up and examining the papers. "You have 24 hours to pack your belongings and leave," I stated as calmly as I could. "If you're not out by tomorrow, I'm calling the police." Eric's face became pale. He didn't anticipate this at all. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm serious," I answered. "I'm done with this. You've been freeloading here without contributing a thing, and now you think you can take over my house? Not anymore." Eric stood up and glared at me, but I did not flinch. I was taller and larger than him, and I was not going to be intimidated by his little rage tantrum. "We're family," he said with gritted teeth. "You can't just throw us out." "Yes, I can," I replied, moving closer. "I'm the one who pays for this house. Not you, not Lucy, and not Mom and Dad. If you don't want to be respectful, you don't get to stay here." Lucy, of course, began crying, as if that would change anything. "I'm pregnant, and you're kicking us out? What kind of brother are you?" "I'm the brother who's been paying for everything while you two take advantage of me," I replied in anger. "You have 24 hours. That's more than generous." Eric seemed to want to argue more, but I could see the realization dawning. I wasn't joking. My mother, who had been sitting quietly the entire time, eventually spoke up. "You can't do this, honey. They're your brother and sister-in-law. This is family." But I didn't care anymore. "I've already done it," I explained, pointing to the eviction notice in her hands. "You've got 30 days to find somewhere else too. If you're not gone by then, I'll be taking legal action." The room fell silent after that. My father didn't say anything, just sat there staring at the table as if he didn't know what to do. My mother appeared to be about to cry, but I refused to back down. It wasn't about being kind anymore. This was about standing up for myself and not allowing others to take advantage of me. After a few lengthy minutes, I returned to my room and left them to process everything. I locked the door, sat at my desk, and took a long breath. I had just done something I never imagined I'd have to do: eject my own family. But you know what? It felt good. It felt right. I was not going to be exploited again. The house was completely silent for the rest of the night. Nobody came to my door. Nobody tried to argue with me. I believe they all knew I wasn't jesting anymore. If they didn't respect me, they didn't deserve to reside here. That night, I enjoyed the best sleep I'd had in weeks. Update 1. After I distributed those eviction papers, I anticipated the tension in the home to either erupt or for everyone to concede and take me seriously. Either way, I knew there was no turning back. I'd established a boundary and wasn't about to let anyone overstep it again. However, instead of the expected explosion, the house became quiet. To be honest, I think it was too quiet. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual because I couldn't sleep. I suppose I was waiting for something to happen. Perhaps Eric would knock on my door and insist that I reconsider. Perhaps my parents would begin pleading with me to reevaluate. But none of that occurred. When I eventually entered the kitchen to prepare breakfast, it was empty. No one was awake yet. No Eric. No Lucy. No parents. For a brief moment, I considered the possibility that they had packed up in the middle of the night and departed without saying anything, but I knew that was wishful thinking. I prepared some coffee, sat down at the table, and waited. I was not in the mood to make small talk or explain myself again. What I had done was necessary. They'd pushed me too far, and I couldn't continue living that way. They didn't respect me, and they certainly didn't appreciate the fact that I paid for everything. All I desired was basic decency, and they couldn't even provide that. After a time, my mother entered the kitchen, her face looking as if she had barely slept. She didn't say anything at first. She simply took a cup of coffee and sat across from me. It was the first time we had truly been alone since I handed her the eviction notice. The uneasy quiet hung in the air for what seemed like an eternity before she eventually spoke up. "Honey," she began, her voice quiet and exhausted. "I know things have gotten out of hand." I didn't say anything. I just stared at my coffee, waiting for the remainder of what she was about to say. I knew an apology, or some variation of one, was on the way, but I wasn't going to let her off the hook that easily. "I didn't realize how bad things had gotten between you and your brother," she explained, her voice shaking slightly. "We were just trying to help them, and I guess I didn't see how unfair it was to you." This caught me by surprise. I didn't expect her to admit it so soon. For a brief moment, I believed she realized I wasn't the villain in this circumstance, but I couldn't shake my unhappiness with the way things had turned out. You didn't just ignore what I wanted, I remarked, my tone harsher than I intended. You sided with them every single time, like you just assumed I'd roll over and let them take whatever they wanted. I know, she answered very quietly. But we thought, well, you've always been the strong one. Eric's never had it easy. She always used that as an excuse. Eric wasn't very strong. Eric had struggled more. Eric needed more help. It was as if they didn't believe I had any boundaries because I was the one who had my life together. And, you think I've had it easy? I replied, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. I'm the one who bought this house. I'm the one who pays the mortgage. I pay for the groceries. I've been carrying all of you. And you think I can just keep doing that forever? She stared down at her coffee and remained silent for a few seconds. I know you've done a lot more than we could have asked for. But Eric, with the baby on the way, I cut her off. This isn't about the baby. This is about respect, and you guys haven't shown me any. She sighed, evidently exhausted by the situation, but I wasn't going to let her get away with a few old excuses. You know, we just thought we were doing the right thing, she ultimately admitted. Eric and Lucy, they don't have much. And whose fault is that? I asked. I didn't ask them to move in. I didn't ask for any of this. They need to figure out their own lives, and you can't keep bailing them out by throwing me under the bus. She nodded, as if she finally understood or tried to. We'll figure something out, she murmured, her voice softer now. But please don't push us out. Not like this. I leaned back in my chair, attempting to relax. I didn't want to expel them. After all, they were my parents. But I couldn't continue to live in a scenario where they didn't respect my boundaries. I had permitted too much to slide, and now it was time to take action. I don't want to push you out, I continued, attempting to seem as composed as I am. But things need to change. I can't keep living like this, being treated like I don't matter in my own house. Either things change, or, yeah, you'll have to find somewhere else to live. She didn't argue, only nodded silently. Okay, she replied. We'll figure something out. After that, she exited the kitchen, leaving me alone, with my thoughts. I wasn't sure if anything would change, but it appeared that they were finally taking me seriously. Eric and Lucy hadn't shown their faces yet, and I wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing. In any case, they were on borrowed time. The aftermath. Eric arrived later that afternoon. Of course, he appeared to have been brooding about what had transpired the previous night. When he stepped into the living room, he didn't even say hello. Instead, he sat across from me, wearing the same angry grimace he always had when he didn't get his way. So, this is how it's going to be? He questioned, his tone harsh. You're really going to kick us out? I gave you 24 hours, I remarked without glancing up from my phone. If you're still here tomorrow, I'm calling the police. Eric scoffed and shook his head as if I were the villain. We're family. Yeah, and family doesn't take advantage of each other, I replied. You've had weeks to figure this out. I'm not your fallback plan. He didn't have anything to say afterward, just sat there for a few minutes before getting up and storming off again. Typical Eric. He was usually the sort to flee when things didn't go his way, and this time was no exception. The rest of the day passed quietly, too softly if I'm being honest. I had no idea what Eric and Lucy were going to do, and I wasn't about to change my mind. I had set them a clear deadline, and they knew I wasn't lying. The following 24 hours were going to determine everything. Update 2. The next morning, after all the chaos, I awoke and lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling. I knew this was the day. Eric and Lucy only had 24 hours, and the time was running out. It was weird, though. I wasn't mad anymore. I'd already accepted what had to happen, so all that remained was for me to carry it out. When I got up and went into the kitchen, I realized that the house felt different. Not tense, but silent, as if something significant was about to occur. There was no one in the kitchen, so I decided to prepare myself some breakfast. Eric and Lucy's previous raid on the groceries had left the fridge mostly empty, but I made do with what I had. As I sat there eating, I began to reflect on how quickly the issue had gotten out of hand. I mean, things weren't always so bad. My mom and I were getting along. I was working, paying the mortgage, and buying food, and life was going along as usual. When Eric and Lucy arrived, everything fell apart. It's incredible how quickly things can change when individuals start feeling entitled to things they didn't earn. A few hours later, I heard someone walk down the corridor. It was my father. He strolled in softly, took a cup of coffee, and sat at the table across from me. He didn't say anything at first, just sipped and glanced out the window. Eventually, he spoke. "Eric and Lucy are leaving today." I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure if he was telling me that they had opted to depart on their own, or that he was simply reminding me of the deadline. Regardless, I nodded, and continued eating. "They don't have anywhere to go," he said quietly. "They're going to stay at a motel for a while, until they figure things out." I paused mid-bite and stared at him. Part of me felt terrible, but the larger part of me understood it had to happen. I'd been too lenient for too long, and if I didn't stand up now, they'd continue to take advantage. "I gave them time," I explained, my voice firm. "I didn't want it to come to this, but they left me no choice." He didn't argue or try to guilt-trip me, which was surprising. He simply nodded and continued drinking his coffee. I believe he finally realized that I was not going to back down this time. There was no returning to the way things were before. Around lunchtime, Eric and Lucy began collecting their belongings. I stayed in my room for the majority of it, not wanting to start another quarrel or hear any more passive-aggressive comments. But after a while, I could hear Eric's voice becoming louder from down the corridor, and I knew it was only a matter of time until something happened. Not long later, Eric knocked on my door. I opened it, and he stood there with the same angry expression he'd had when I handed him the eviction notice. "You're really going to let this happen?" he questioned, his voice stern. "You're just going to kick us out like this?" I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "I gave you 24 hours. I told you we're family." "Yeah, and family doesn't take advantage of each other," I replied. "You've had weeks to figure this out. I'm not your fallback plan." He didn't have anything to say afterward, just sat there for a few minutes before getting up and storming off again. Typical Eric. He was usually the sort to flee when things didn't go his way, and this time was no exception. The rest of the day passed quietly. Too softly, if I'm being honest. I had no idea what Eric and Lucy were going to do, and I wasn't about to change my mind. I had set them a clear deadline, and they knew I wasn't lying. The following 24 hours were going to determine everything. Update 2. The next morning, after all the chaos, I awoke and lay there for a few minutes, staring at the ceiling. I knew this was the day. Eric and Lucy only had 24 hours, and the time was running out. It was weird, though. I wasn't mad anymore. I'd already accepted what had to happen, so all that remained was for me to carry it out. When I got up and went into the kitchen, I realized that the house felt different. Not tense, but silent, as if something significant was about to occur. There was no one in the kitchen, so I decided to prepare myself some breakfast. Eric and Lucy's previous raid on the groceries had left the fridge mostly empty, but I made do with what I had. As I sat there eating, I began to reflect on how quickly the issue had gotten out of hand. I mean, things weren't always so bad. My mom and I were getting along, I was working, paying the mortgage, and buying food, and life was going along as usual. When Eric and Lucy arrived, everything fell apart. It's incredible how quickly things can change when individuals start feeling entitled to things they didn't earn. A few hours later, I heard someone walk down the corridor. It was my father. He strolled in softly, took a cup of coffee, and sat at the table across from me. He didn't say anything at first, just sipped and glanced out the window. Eventually, he spoke. "Eric and Lucy are leaving today." I didn't answer immediately. I wasn't sure if he was telling me that they had opted to depart on their own, or that he was simply reminding me of the deadline. Regardless, I nodded and continued eating. "They don't have anywhere to go," he said quietly. "They're going to stay at a motel for a while until they figure things out." I paused mid-bite and stared at him. Part of me felt terrible, but the larger part of me understood it had to happen. I'd been too lenient for too long, and if I didn't stand up now, they'd continue to take advantage. "I gave them time," I explained, my voice firm. "I didn't want it to come to this, but they left me no choice." He didn't argue or try to guilt-trip me, which was surprising. He simply nodded and continued drinking his coffee. I believe he finally realized that I was not going to back down this time. There was no returning to the way things were before. Around lunchtime, Eric and Lucy began collecting their belongings. I stayed in my room for the majority of it, not wanting to start another quarrel or hear any more passive-aggressive comments. But after a while, I could hear Eric's voice becoming louder from down the corridor, and I knew it was only a matter of time until something happened. Not long later, Eric knocked on my door. I opened it, and he stood there with the same angry expression he'd had when I handed him the eviction notice. You're really going to let this happen? He questioned, his voice stern. You're just going to kick us out like this? I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. I gave you 24 hours, I told you what.